The second thing we're going to discuss for this module is I wanted to clarify how we use Mendelsohn's victim typology, as well as clarify the terms of victim precipitation versus victim facilitation versus victim provocation. So we're going to start with those. The victim precipitation theory, I also sometimes teach the psychology of human sexuality. And we use this a lot when we talk about the victim blaming of rape victims, of sexual assault victims, because the victim precipitation theory is one where there's an examination of how was the victim responsible for his or her own victimization. Basically, which parts of these were their fault. Mendelsohn's victim typology, if you've gotten this part in your textbook already, really kind of rings true with this victim precipitation theory, right? Like there's a lot of wording in there that sounds like it's making it seem like this is partially the victim's fault. And we'll get to that. The next one is victim facilitation. And this tends to be the more preferred one because it's acknowledging that there might have been things that the victim did that made themselves look like an easier target, but that does not mean that it was their fault that they were the victim of a crime. It could have been unintentional. It could have been an oversight, right? Just because maybe I was careless with something, that doesn't make it my fault that someone chose to assault me. So the victim facilitation perspective is that a victim might unintentionally make it easier for an offender to commit a crime. It gets rid of that victim blaming language while still acknowledging there were some risk factors here that could have been avoided to perhaps make this person a less likely victim, to make them look like a less convenient victim. An example of this, the gym that I go to right now has signs up everywhere that there has been an increase in rates in cars being broken into. Make sure your car is locked, make sure you don't have anything valuable where it's visible in your windows, things of that nature. So, and the way my car is, it has like the pop-up locks where just looking in the window of the car, it's very obvious if the car is locked or unlocked based on if the pop-up is like this or if it's flat. So the victim facilitation theory, if I forget to lock my car when I go into the gym and I leave my purse sitting right on the seat and someone opens my car door and steals my purse, even though there were signs warning me and all this stuff. The victim facilitation theory would say, I unintentionally made it easier for an offender to steal my stuff. You know, I was careless. I wasn't paying attention. I created a window of opportunity that could have been avoided, but it's still not my fault that my car got broken into, right? The person who stole my stuff decided to steal my stuff. It's their fault. So it's not that it's my fault. It's just that I was careless and unintentionally easier for this to happen to me. And the third terminology related to this is the victim provocation perspective. And that is that a person has done something that has directly incited another person to commit an illegal act. Basically, excuse my dogs, they're very hyper. Basically, without the victim's behavior being what it was, the crime would not have occurred. If I go to a bar and pick a fight, and I am more injured in that fight than the other person, and I say that I'm the victim because I got hurt worse, that would be an example of victim provocation, right? This crime would not have occurred. I would not have been insulted if it wasn't for my own behavior in that situation. You know, someone tries to break into someone else's house or mug someone, and the person they are trying to rob has a weapon and attacks them. The person who is injured, the robber, might still turn into the victim in that situation if they're the one that's injured or killed, but that would not have happened to them without their own behavior being what it was. So hopefully that helps clarify those three terms, because when your textbook uses them, sometimes it seems like they're using them interchangeably, but those are the distinctions between those three. So now let's move on to Mendelsohn's victim typology. And this really operates from a victim precipitation and victim provocation framework. And it's gotten a lot of slack for that. So I'm not advocating that the wording of this is the best. I am letting you know that it is very controversial. A lot of people don't like how it's worded, but it is something that is still used within the court system today. So the Mendelsohn victim typology. The first one is the innocent victim. And this is an individual that did not at all contribute to their victimization, right? A child is molested. A child is the victim of domestic violence. Innocent victim. They're a kid. They did not contribute. Someone breaks into your house and robs you. Innocent victim. You did not contribute to that. The next one is a victim with minor guilt. And this is the one that, like we were just talking about, a lot of people would prefer to label this as victim facilitation. But Mendelsohn referred to it as a victim with minor guilt. And the idea here is they contributed to a minor degree by placing themselves in harm's way, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So they put themselves in harm's way. They walked home alone at night in the dangerous neighborhood. They left their car unlocked. They left their front door unlocked. They got too drunk out in public, whatever. They contributed to their victimization by placing themselves in harm's way. So again, we would like to use a more victim facilitation perspective of that and not blame people for their victimization based on their mistakes, based on their carelessness, whatever it might be. But that's what Mendelsohn would have referred to as a victim with minor guilt. The next one is the guilty victim, guilty offender. And this is a situation where the victim and the offender were engaged in a criminal activity together. Both were using drugs. Both were being violent with each other. So the idea here is they both bear equal responsibility. And unfortunately, this is the argument that people often try to get into in domestic violence cases. Well, they were both guilty. They both did something wrong. On and on. The next one is the guilty offender, but guiltier victim. And this is where the victim might have been the primary attacker, but the offender won the fight. Basically, the victim instigated or provoked their own victimization. And this goes back to that victim provocation idea, right? I start the fight, but I lose the fight. So now I decide I'm the victim because I was hurt worse than the other guy, but I still started the fight, right? Like I'm guiltier in that situation. I was the primary attacker. I started it. If you want to see a great recent example of these past two, the guilty victim, guilty offender, and guilty offender, guiltier victim, how this is played out in media, go back and review some of the stuff with the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, because this is the conflict that a lot of people were spiraling around. In that is, if they were both being violent to each other, who was guiltier, who started it? And unfortunately, this is oftentimes how this argument plays out in court. The next one is the guilty victim, and that is where the victim is victimized during or as the result of committing a crime. They instigated the conflict, but they were killed in self-defense. And the last one is the imaginary victim. And this is where an individual has pretended victimization. They weren't actually a victim. They've pretended victimization. They've falsified a report. They've made false claims. They've made false accusations for attention, for legal benefit, for whatever reason. They have totally falsified the situation. So again, Mendelsohn's typology, very controversial. Lots of people hate it, but it is still used some in court cases, and you do still see applications of this playing out. This is one that you, depending on what you choose, you could very easily tie into your final paper assignment as well. This is a pretty easy one to work with. So that is the clarification of those terms. Please let me know if you have any questions as you work through that chapter.